How did you discover your passion for storytelling as an actor and a dancer, and how have those different mediums lend themselves to each other?
Yeah, I think like I've always been kind of a creative and a performer and also a science brain too. So kind of getting a job in healthcare was really aligned with my science brain. And then my creative brain started to see the world of healthcare like as a total canvas for like everything I create, all the characters that I play too. And I've learned that it was likely like a like a dissociation like response because I would just start to turn all the chaos into like films or dance routines in my head, and I've always been kind of
Mm,
like that. I've always navigated challenging times by like creating a film or a story in my brain, and that's just how I've always processed. So these parts of who I am have always kind of intersected. I get asked a lot about, well, how do you balance nursing and acting or performing? And I'm like, it's not a balancing act. It's just like these are parts of who I am that are
mm,
always kind of in flow. And I think when you're a creator and artist, like your work is a reflection of the life that you've lived. So
yeah,
that's and the stories that you want to tell are a reflection of that too. So that's kind of how I've always, yeah, navigated it.
great answer. When you look at your career as a whole, who or what has had the biggest influence, either personally or professionally?
I did, yeah, totally. I did this film called Loon in 2019 with a woman named Aviva Amor Ostroff, and she's my biggest inspiration thus far in terms of making your own work. She
Mm,
wrote a play when she was 18 about her life navigating a while having a bipolar father and navigating life. And she wrote herself as her father. So she played her father in the play at like 18. And then she put it away for a bit and then turned it into a screenplay like 20 years later and wrote herself as a mother and hired me to play her daughter, which is a younger version of her, essentially. So I was playing her. So being so close to a story that is so close to somebody else, being a part of
mm,
that is such an honor and a privilege. And she taught me so much that you are your own stories. Like that's what people want to see.
yeah,
And you are unique because no one else has lived your life. So tell those stories because they're compelling.
yeah.
And so she really kind of propelled me into this world of starting to make my own work, starting to really take a look at processing as art as a form of processing and discovery. And yeah, and then a year and a half later the pandemic happened and that was a hellhole, and I got redeployed to the emergency department, which I haven't worked in years, and it was chaos and pandemonium, but it was also a total canvas too. And I always kind of had Aviva in my mind in terms of this, I'm going to turn this into something one day. This experience is going to turn into something else one day. And I remember kind of back and forthing with her a lot during like the challenging parts of the pandemic. And she was like, just keep writing, just keep writing, just keep writing. And I remember her saying that. And then I did. I
Yeah.
started dancing again. I started making all these like weird little dance videos when I get home from a really hard shift because I actually had trouble with words. Words were hard. It was so many new feelings and experiences coming
Mm,
up. I didn't know how to translate it into verbal language, but dance and performance was always such a safe space for me. And yeah, it was really cool to make these videos and then watch them back and be like, oh, that's what that was, or
yeah.
oh, that's what I was trying to say. And anyway, it was an exercise and more of a thing to discover what I was actually trying to figure out. And then it turned into a short film that I
Yeah.
created. And yeah, it all serves each other in a way, and that's kind of what I've really learned in the past few years on my little journey here as an artist is yeah, it's all useful. even especially the challenging parts of things that you're navigating, those are like the absolute gold, because yeah, it's an experience that people want to understand or learn about, or
Yeah,
and you can offer that. Yeah. If
beautifully
that answers
said.
your question, I
Yeah.
feel like.
Oh, that was such a beautiful answer. And speaking of that short film, it's making its way around the festival circuit, and you actually wrote, co-directed, and starred in it. How have your experiences behind the camera impacted the way that you've now approached your work on screen and vice versa?
Yeah, it was a super interesting, one of the most rewarding creative experiences I've ever done. I mean, I wrote it, but it was mostly improvised with
Yeah.
a good friend of mine, Neve Wilson, who I actually think you interviewed not recently for your,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Last week.
amazing. Oh God, I love her. So we directed that together, because she's a dancer. She's a really wonderful actor, and I like her instincts with things. And
Mm,
because she dances too, we could speak the same language in a way. So I
yeah.
really trusted her to just be behind the camera while I was, I don't know, figuring it out. So we worked really well together, and that was our not only first time directing something, but co-directing something. It was its own thing. But it was amazing to kind of put into action all of these little things that I took the time to either record or discover during my pandemic days. Like all those dance videos, even though they didn't make it in, they provided kind of a framework for how I wanted to tell this story. And so to just be able to put that into action and to find people who want to help you make it too, it's just amazing. It was super special. And yeah, to be able to translate all of that frenetic energy,
Mm,
that depression, that grief, that chaos, that everything into some form of joy to share with other people, um, was amazing. And I being in the editing room with Neve and really seeing, especially both being actors, we really took away how micro moments, like seconds and milliseconds, how the position of your face when you're looking at somebody else or something tells so many stories. Like it's these like micro moments that you only really get when you're super present. So that was definitely a big takeaway for me, being behind the camera, going back into acting and playing characters is like, whoo, yeah, it's that thing that this device catches everything. Like you
yeah.
can't, it doesn't lie, and it's very powerful.
What a small world. Yeah, I think we should give a very similar answer when I chatted with her last week too
Oh
about kind of
yeah.
the positioning.
Oh no way.
And
Yeah.
season two of From is airing now. And I think one of the benefits of television as a medium is the opportunity to live with a character for an extended period of time. And often, the showrunners and writers are able to incorporate elements of each of the actors into their characters. How has that collaboration grown from season one into season two? And how has that trust allowed you to kind of take agency over your character?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I play a med student on the show, and being a nurse, moonlighting as a nurse in my other life, was very beneficial and kind of almost immediately established some trust between myself and the showrunners and the directors. They didn't know I was actually a nurse when they hired me, which I loved. Then there was some scenes in season one where I was like, actually, like this isn't how this would go. This is actually how this would
Mm,
go. I know we're in TV land, but like, could we maybe do it this way? It could still be super suspenseful, but at least it's medically accurate. And I won't have
yeah.
my med friends being like, Chloe, come on. I don't know. I also took it on as like a responsibility and a duty to like the healthcare workers as well to like represent. um, and they were so receptive. They were so grateful they're like, yes, we want to make it as real as possible. Of course, like tell us everything. So
Mm,
that was amazing. And I'm also queer, and they originally had Christy in like a heteronormative dynamic back at home, and I was like, "Well, you hired me, and I'm queer." And I think I'd really like to bring those parts of who I am to her as well. Like I was already bringing so much being an actual healthcare worker, like leaving
Yeah.
this other huge part of who I am behind felt um uh yeah, felt strange. I felt like I had to come at it with everything of who I am. And again, they were like, yeah, of course we love that. Like, and then we were gifted with Kaylin Ohm, who plays Marielle, which is amazing. So I think again, it's like a reminder that the more honest you are with yourself and who you
Mm.
are and what you want to bring, like the more they'll be willing to work with you. And yeah, it's super special to have that type of agency over your character. It's actually not that common.
Yeah.
So to be able to bring so much of my life experience to this has been a trip. Like I've come away learning more about my own humanity by playing Christy.
Mm.
And I think as an actor, that's kind of what you're always chasing is that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a really, really special kind of meta experience for me, for sure.
Yeah, it's at that authenticity that's connecting with audiences as well. You know, this season we're gonna get to see Christy really explore her vulnerabilities, which you're bringing so much nuance to. As a storyteller, how did you create the space for yourself to dive into that arc, given that it's such a departure from where the Christy that we meet in season one, where she's so
Mm,
guarded and holding her cards very close to her chest
yeah.
to do the job at hand. How did you kind of prepare for that?
Yeah, amazing question. I think having the arrival of Marielle
Yeah.
really created a sense of like moving all of the furniture around in her. I think she worked really
Mm.
hard in season one to keep her cards close, to stay focused, because she knows the minute she veers off from that, she starts daydreaming about her past life, like she won't be available to her work.
Yeah.
And I know that firsthand from
Huh.
being a nurse. Like the minute, like interpersonal relationships when you work in healthcare, especially as I'm not a med student, but my med student friends, my doctor friends, like are challenging because you are responsible for so much in your day to day that you emotionally turn off,
Mm.
and that comes home with you, and it carries into your relationships and whatnot, and you forget how to feel. And that's a very real thing, and that's season one Christy. She could get away with that. We see her. There's some nuance in terms of how she's feeling, but I think it's not. She's not fully embodied in any form of expression. She knows she can't. Once she pops that lid, it won't be good. So season two, with the sudden arrival of Marielle, like the container on the lid is totally about to burst. Like there's a complete loss of control in that regard too, because someone like Marielle, you can't you can't just turn off your feelings, especially when it's
Yeah.
literally sudden out of the blue and you were just considering like 15 minutes ago, like, am I ever going to see her again? Should I go to Iceland with Kenny? Like, it's just these moments of like light vulnerability. And then she's forced to confront everything. And she doesn't know how. And we watch her and she's like a cat. She's just like
Mm.
frozen and so overwhelmed. And like, she can't even get her words out properly. And in terms of arcing that, I didn't really arc it. I just allowed myself to feel. I mean, Kaylin's
Mm.
a wonderful actor and brings so much too, and I just trusted that that moment will be what it'll be, and it'll be true and real, and I'll
Beautifully
go
said.
from there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then I just kind of gave Christy permission to feel and just to
Mm.
see what happens, and I think this season it's a lot of battle between her duty and her heart are constantly in flux, and the push and the
Yeah.
pull, and like trying to like maintain composure in this like doctorly way that makes her feel safe and others feel safe too. I mean, I think people would start to worry if Christy just was explosive left, right, and center.
Mm.
Like she's
Yeah.
always got at the back of her brain that like I can't lose my cool. But eventually, like she's a human being confronted with a lot. And her honey is there. Like it's a
Mm.
it's she can't make sense of any of it, even though, and I think what's interesting is we watch her try and she's just losing, which makes
Yeah.
it real. Yeah.
Perfect segue to this next question. But the arrival of Marielle feels like a reflection point for Christy. How early on did the writers clue you in on her arrival? And did you learn anything new about your character seeing her from the perspective of another character?
Oh yeah, nice question. I found out before we started shooting season 2. I wasn't supposed to find out, but it got slipped to me. And I was like, wow, okay, crazy. That's going to be really interesting. And I was like, oh, this is how we're going to get to know Christy. This is how we're going to get to know her
Yeah.
humanity. Because yeah, like in season 1, there weren't quite those dynamics or scenes to really lean into that. And I think romantic relationships, it's often how you can get to know someone's insides because they're often on the outside at that point. I learned that like Christy freezes when she is in deep feeling. Like
Mm,
she's not like a flight or a fight, she's a freeze. And I think that comes from like her training, right? Like constant like assessing, right? So to see that so viscerally though, in that when she's confronted with her, especially in that storeroom scene in episode 2 where Marielle is just so upset, rightfully so. And Chris, she's just like trying, like you just see her brain trying to figure out what to do. And I was like, oh my gosh, this poor girl doesn't quite know what to do, and it's so obvious. And
mm,
I think also like the deep love that she has for Marielle too, like
yeah.
it's so overwhelming, and she's just like she just wants to make it right but doesn't know how either. And I think all of that kind of suppression that she has been doing since she arrived to town, like she doesn't know how to, she's not a very good communicator in terms of her feelings. I mean, who would be in that town, but like especially Christy, like she's completely mixed up. So yeah, I think this season was, especially that dynamic between the two, is a lot of them trying to find each other, you know, and
Yeah.
there's so much tension there. It's like these two people were catapulted out of each other's lives and then brought back together in a literal hellscape. So it's also like super interesting to figure out what has changed for Christy, what's remained, and
Mm,
yeah, like what's transformed for like art. Is she the same person?
yeah.
And that's, I think Marielle would know that looking at Christy, you know?
Yeah.
And that's really interesting and real. And it's funny. A lot of people talk about this love triangle between Marielle and Kenny, and I don't like that word triangle. I'm like, I don't like to shape a dynamic.
Mm,
I don't
yeah.
think it's that at all. I think it's like these three people in these insane circumstances trying to figure out what they mean to each other and how much they've changed.
Yeah.
And what,
And the series has been able to tackle so many universal themes through kind of a horror lens. Why do you think this genre lends itself to this type of storytelling?
because it's actually not that far from the world we're living in, you know? Like
Yeah.
I think just on the macro level, right?
Yeah.
Like it wasn't that long ago we were living in an absolute endemic hellscape and the monsters were microscopic, killing people left, right, and center.
Mm,
You know what I mean? And you can say that about a lot of things going on in the world right now. There's wars left, right, and center. There's people
yeah.
being monsters to each other. It's super real. And yeah, it's heightened on TV. Like it's a different type of monster, but I mean, there's monsters in this world too, and there's also beautiful people who come together to try to figure out how to survive. And why do we want to keep surviving? What's pushing us to wake up the next day? You know what I mean? And that camaraderie that you find with people in order to keep going, and that's super real too. And I think the show doesn't really lends itself to exploring those, yeah, like you said, universal themes of like what keeps you going.
This is the longest that you've lived with a character. Has anything surprised you about the overall experience? What have you learned about your craft through this process?
Oh yeah, great questions, Kevin. I love these. I learned that as I think it's always the best thing to bring as much of you to
Mm,
anything possible. But these characters, no matter how hard you try to control them, you might share the same breath and a heartbeat, but they start to take a life of their own,
mm,
which I find so interesting. I'm
yeah.
like watching it, I'm like, it's me, but it's not me. Even though I'm trying to bring all of who I am to this, there's something else that happens between the writing and a chemical reaction and and the directing that like shifts it away and turns it into its own being,
Mm,
which has been really, it's like it feels like magic. And like
yeah.
that's been really cool, and you only really get to see that when you are living with a character for so long. And I'm starting to see she's becoming more and more of a departure of who I am, but not for any
Mm,
conscious effort. Like all I want to do is bring all of me to something, but they start to shape shift, and it's they're a living being, and you're always growing and changing, and so are your characters. So I think at a certain point as an actor, you are a parent to it. You nurture it, and like
mm,
it doesn't go if
yeah.
you're too much, but like you let it turn into what it wants to become. And we have an amazing writer and director and showrunner who won't lead you astray either. So I think yeah, letting it take a life of its own has been really, it's been really cool. It also takes a bit of the pressure off too, in a weird
Yeah.
way. You're like, just there's like a some such surrender to it, uh,
Hmm.
which I think's amazing and special. And that's, and then you just come away learning more about yourself too.